Hello again, and yes, we are still in audit planning. I thought that in the last video we'd be able to tick off the last three activities, but as fate would have it, we were only able to discuss assessing and managing risks. So for this segment, we're going to finish discussing audit plan and audit program and considering the work of others, which actually are quite short subtopics. But we need this one for us to be able to complete audit planning. Let's now talk about the difference between an audit strategy versus an audit plan and an audit program. Now, I'd like for you to imagine planning a social event, maybe a party. Can you think maybe of a Thanksgiving party that you would be organizing once you become a certified public accountant already? And perhaps you get to think about the theme of this party. Maybe you feel so patriotic that time and you are saying, well, the theme of my party is that it has to be very Filipino, Pinoy na Pinoy. Okay, everything must be in Philippine mode. Okay, so if you think about it, that's the theme that will drive everything else, right? And then you go to thinking about what particular areas in my party would make it scream Filipino. And then you have identified, well, number one, the dress code. Everything must be in Filipiniana. Number two, maybe the food. It has to be Filipino food. Maybe the program. All of the songs and intermission number must be done by Filipino artists and songs. And then maybe the language that is being used. Bawal mag-English. Okay? Everything must be in Filipino. And then when you talk about the food, for example, let's think about adobo, for example. And then we come up with the recipe for adobo. How do you cook adobo? What do you need? What are the steps in order to cook the perfect Filipino adobo? Why am I talking about these things? You might think that it's all, how is this related to audit strategy versus plan versus program? Well, if you think about it, the theme of having a purely Filipino social gathering is or can be likened to an audit strategy. You design the general scope, timing, and direction. And then once you're able to identify the specific areas where to focus on, still in broad strokes, but now it's becoming a little bit more definite, a little bit more concrete, and you're able to identify specific areas already. And then when we go to the recipe for how to cook adobo, it has become so detailed, right? It's the most detailed of them all. So strategy is the broadest, and then you're able to identify the general areas of focus. That's the audit plan. And then you get to talk about the instructions on how to, and that is what you will find in an audit program. So the audit strategy is a required output of audit planning. It establishes or establishing the audit strategy involves designing optimized approaches that seek to achieve the necessary audit assurance at the lowest cost within the constraints of the information available. As previously mentioned, the overall audit strategy sets the scope, timing, and direction of the audit, and it guides the development of the more detailed audit plan. So, definitely, the audit plan is more detailed than an audit strategy, but is still broader as compared to an audit program. So, an audit plan contains the overview of the engagement, outlining the nature and characteristics of the client's business operation, and it has to be in tune or in line with the overall audit strategy. This is, of course, prepared before starting the work at the client's office and typically includes the following information: the description of the client company, what are the audit objectives, the description of the services to be performed, the timetable of the audit work, estimated start date and estimated end date, the work to be done by the client, the assignment of the audit staff, the target completion dates, preliminary evaluation and judgment about materiality levels, any special problems to be resolved, and conditions that may require changes in audit test. So you would notice that the audit plan is more detailed than an audit program. However, in terms of the actual procedures, the procedures are still in broad strokes. If you would like to see the specific detailed step by step procedures, then you look for the audit program, because the audit program is a set of audit procedures specifically designed for each audit. And in here, you will see the set of instructions, addressed to assistants involved in the audit and some means to control and record the proper execution of the work. That is why for some of our students who have become new certified public accountants and they become a bit anxious as to can they really perform an audit? Would they know what to do? Then I would just say, not to worry, just find the audit program. The audit program includes the set of instructions and then just follow the instructions. The audit program may also contain audit objectives for each area and, of course, the time budget. Again, the idea is that it is able to control and record the proper execution of the work. Now, in terms of developing the audit programs, if, for example, this is an initial engagement, the audit program typically will develop in three stages. This is for initial engagements. Okay, of course, for recurring engagements, you would already have a ready audit program. You just need to tailor fit it or revise it as the need would arise. But for initial engagements, the audit program will develop in three stages. The broad phases of the program can be outlined at the time of the engagement, and then other details can be identified after the review of the internal control structure and accounting procedures has begun. And you must remember that the review of the internal control structure and accounting procedures is normally done at the risk assessment phase, and then procedures on specific phases of the audit can be further challenged and revised as the work progresses. This gives you then the idea that coming up with an audit program does not mean that it is already fixed and can no longer be revised. In fact, as the work progresses, the audit program can be challenged and revised. Similar to our materiality considerations, while we initially set materiality at the beginning, we are allowed to review it and even revise it as the audit progresses. So, just the same with our audit programs as well. So that is the difference between a strategy, the broadest, the plan, more detailed than a strategy, but still contains broad strokes. And then if you want the detailed set of instructions, then we go for the audit program. And then finally, to tick off the last activity under audit planning, we take a look at considering the work of others. And for the work of others, of course, who are these others? We talk about the ex-auditor or the predecessor auditor, and we already know that as an incoming auditor, as the successor auditor, it is our responsibility to initiate contact with the predecessor auditor, provided that the client so allows it. By the way, there are certain instances whereby the client would allow the predecessor auditor, to respond to your request, but then may also limit the response of the predecessor auditor. So if the client allows the predecessor auditor to give a limited response, then the predecessor auditor simply discloses the fact that only a limited response is allowed. Or if the client does not allow, prohibits the predecessor auditor from responding to the successor auditor's communication, then the predecessor auditor will simply also have to disclose that such permission was not granted. You may also be finding yourselves working with other CPAs, such as, for example, if the client has internal auditors, and if these internal auditors are also CPAs, or even when they are not CPAs, you also need to determine the involvement of these people in the audit, including as well their objectivity and their expertise. Speaking of expertise, you may also find yourselves working with experts, and in this case, you should evaluate the expert's competence and the expert's objectivity. While we do not necessarily expect experts to be independent, but at the very least, they should be objective. The objectivity of the expert, similar to that of an internal auditor, can be seen by inspecting the organizational chart or looking at their lines of communication. To whom do they directly report to? In terms of competence, on the other hand, well, you could always look at their academic backgrounds and certifications and such. Of course, we need to work with the client staff. Okay, so there are certain working papers that are prepared by the client, but we have to remember they should not be accepted at face value. It is important that while we gather this information, and yes, they are evidence, we still have to corroborate said information. Okay, and as I have mentioned, you may be working with internal auditors. It can affect your audit in two ways. Number one, an internal audit department actually enhances internal control, and they could help assist the external auditors in performing specific audit procedures. However, I must be very clear in telling you that you cannot transfer your responsibility to the internal auditors. In fact, you can't even share your responsibility with the internal auditors. Okay, they are simply there in an assisting capacity, but they are not to take your place, and you cannot share your responsibility with them. So there you have it. Activities 5 and 6 for audit planning. So yay to us. We have already ticked off the phase on audit planning. And as you have very well seen, our audit planning phase already encompasses as well the risk assessment procedures. Wow, this is a short video, but we will meet again in the next video, and this time we're going to talk about risk response. So see you then.